agreement that agenda items 5, 6 and 9 are covered by Hansard. Apologies from Peter Weir and all other apologies. No. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 9. Members content are now to record.
Agreed.
Table of requests, pages 11 to 15 for noting. I can refer members to page 16 in their packs, where there's a proposed agenda from the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform with regard to the proposed committee visit and informal meeting in the new year. Can I ask members if there are any suggested additions or amendments, and then a further draft can be considered.
This page, yeah, page 16 of the pack, Chair. Main pack, there's one or two items that may fall a bit outside the remit of the committee in terms of, towards the end there, tourism, energy and agriculture sectors and things like that. So there's plenty of time. It's just members can take this away and have a think about it, and then it can be agreed before. A date hasn't been set yet. A rescheduled date hasn't been set for the informal meeting. So
members content with that approach, and if there's any other items for the agenda, to feed them in.
Yep.
Please. Okay, can I seek agreement that the committee moves into closed session for the next agenda item? Members, the short paper at pages 89 to 92, the main packs.
Morning, folks.
Morning.
Sure.
Okay, members, can I welcome Mr. Tony Simpson and Mr. William Dixon from the Strategic Policy Division within DFP. Tony, you want to kick us off with a wee update on where things are at?
Yeah, sure. I'll not say too much by way of opening remarks because the committee's obviously well aware of the background to this. Clearly things have moved on since our update note due of the 1st of December. So as you'll all know, the Chancellor in his autumn statement last Wednesday announced that corporation tax powers could be devolved subject, and I'll quote him, subject to the executive showing it's able to manage its financial implications of that. So while there's clearly conditions, it's obviously very positive that the government's recognised that we have a case for the devolution of corporation tax. As you know, over the course of the past year, we've been working with colleagues in OFM, DFM and DERE, engaging with the Treasury to develop the regime that would be implemented if a positive decision was reached. And essentially the objectives of that regime are to strike a balance between getting a regime that's attractive to business and will encourage genuine additional economic activity while ensuring that the costs are proportionate. The detail of that regime has been reflected in a draft bill which is being developed by colleagues in Treasury and HMRC. We've yet to see the actual draft of the bill, but they were working to a timescale that it would be ready for the autumn statement. So we've asked to see that, but we've yet to see it. The autumn statement confirmed that if the draft legislation will be introduced in Parliament, subject to satisfactory progress being made in the current cross-party talks, and subject to the government agreeing to offer us the powers and the executive then making the decision to accept those. We would expect to see that draft bill pass through the House of Commons and the Lords in order to receive royal assent before the end of Parliament at the end of March. In terms of the process, we'll be seeking the consent of the Assembly for Westminster to legislate on this, and we'll be doing that via an LCM. So we'll be back to see you, hopefully on that. In terms of next stages in implementation, if there's a positive decision, the Treasury and HMRC have indicated that it would take about up to 2 years to put the necessary implementation arrangements in terms of IT and administrative procedures in place. So the earliest we could perhaps have a devolved rate applied would be 2017. It's for the executive to decide that clearly. So the next stage would be for the executive to then decide on a rate, how that would be introduced, how it would be reduced or phased or so on, and that will need to be made in the light of the kind of broader public expenditure position and how the benefits would be expected to flow. And I'm sure we probably talk about that over the course of the session. That's essentially where we are. So happy, maybe rather than take too much time going into detail now, happy to take questions, Chair, if you're...
So, like, just in terms of the costs of varying the corporation tax rate, I mean, obviously this has been debated to some degree. If the executive get the powers to vary the rate, and that has an economic knock-on effect in terms of additional income tax, less welfare payments, so that's going to have an economic benefit to the central purse in terms of Westminster. How does that come back to us again, or does that come back to us again? Has that question been raised with the Treasury? Because obviously there will be economic benefits that we may not get.
Yes. The short answer is yes, we've been raising that with them in the discussions on how the block adjustment would be applied. We haven't got agreement with the Treasury on that yet. The focus to date has been on nailing down what the initial direct and indirect costs would be, and they've provided estimates of that. We've advised with ministers on that. But in terms of those wider benefits, there's no agreement from Treasury in terms of how, if and how they would be reflected in the block adjustment, and that's something that we need to continue to engage with them on over the coming months.
Has there been many positive signs from them, or?
In terms of that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to describe them as either positive or negative. You know, the view maybe from Treasury is they're quite difficult to estimate in terms of kind of identifying precisely what they are, and that's a discussion that we've had with them. That we think, well, there are ways that perhaps it could be their estimates could be developed and it could be reflected in the block grant adjustment. They haven't said no. They haven't said yes. It's something for further discussion.
In terms of if we were to get Corporation Tax 2017, and obviously there will be some time before it beds down, how is the Department proposing we deal with the peaks and the troughs? Because some projections are saying it could be 6, 7, 8 years before you see a net benefit in terms of corporation tax.
Yes, well, again, that's another issue that we still need to bottom out with Treasury. There is an assumption that an agreement or acceptance that we will have to have some mechanism to manage that volatility, whether that's short-term borrowing powers, or whether there's some transitional arrangements that would be put in as the rate beds down. But there is a recognition from Treasury that there would need to be something put in place to enable us to manage that volatility.
Finally, then, has the Treasury sent you down a definition of what satisfactory progress is?
No, we have asked as officials. I know it's been asked. I know the previous finance minister asked in the chamber following the autumn statement. No, we've yet to see what will be deemed as satisfactory progress.
Paul?
Thank you. It's just in relation to getting the exact tax lift that is coming from Northern Ireland, and the chairs already went on to the point where there will be probably revenue generated through this process, albeit it might take a few years for that to kick in. Has there been? We've heard such variances on the figures. Are we just going to have to accept whatever Treasury say to us, or have we got some more scientific method of extrapolating the exact cost? Because we've only got 1.8 million people in Northern Ireland. It's very simple to work out how many people are working off that number of people and what tax draw is given, because a very quick survey will tell you how much tax has been drawn from each individual person who is employed, and then the companies associated with that. But we have companies which are maybe not necessarily even based here, but they're creating employment here. Is there corporation tax? Where is their corporation tax drawn? It will not be based in Northern Ireland. Say, for argument's sake, it's a company that is head office in Manchester, but they're employing quite a number of people here in Northern Ireland. So therefore, there's no net benefit to us as a region on that point. but they're still getting revenue from the tax draw here. How do we get, instead of smoke and mirrors, we know exactly what we're seeing? Because, to be honest, there's such a variance in the figures that you say, well, you know, we could pluck any figure out of the sky, and they could say, well, that's what you owe us. We have no way of actually saying whether that's correct or incorrect. And it happens the same whenever the unions, and I know they were trying to find out information in relation to pensions from actuaries, and it was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And really, we're no further forward. How do we get sure that what we are losing or gaining is actually ours?
Yeah, well, certainly over the process to take us to where we are now, we have been working with HMRC, and we have been, as best we can, interrogating the figures and challenging them on the assumptions. In terms of the actual the tax take at the moment, it is based on analysis of the administrative data. It does take into account where you may have operations of GB headquartered firms which have branches in Northern Ireland, and there are mechanisms in place to track and to estimate how much tax is attributable to the operations in Northern Ireland, or equally if you have Northern Ireland firms here who have operations in GB. So there are mechanisms in place, and what we'll be looking to see is, as we develop an administrative scheme with HMRC, is to ensure that the data is available so that we can see precisely where, what companies and what region are generating what tax and what's attributable to the Northern Ireland regime.
Just a quick follow-on from that. You mentioned the Azores case in your paper, and it says, particularly important is the fiscal autonomy criterion, that the full fiscal consequences of a reduced rate should be borne by the region. Now, that's not only fiscal cost, but also fiscal benefits. So in terms of fiscal consequences, if there is a consequence in terms of income tax revenues and other revenues, then surely if the Treasury try to cheat us out, and would use that word, try to cheat us out of monies we are entitled to through the system, then could they be subject to challenge in Europe?
Well, I suppose the first point I would make is that's a point that we've been making with officials. That we think it should apply to both the costs and benefits. It's a point that the Minister has made just prior to, it has been made at ministerial level. The Minister has made that point in correspondence with the Treasury just prior to the autumn statement, to emphasise that we do see that if we're bearing the cost, that we should also share in the benefits of that. There's a process that we need to go through with the Commission to ensure that they're satisfied with the regime as it's defined, that it's Azores compliant, and that there's no state aid in the regime. So, that's something that will be looked at, and we will be pressing very hard to ensure that the costs, as we see it, the costs are appropriate.
Is it?
So you mentioned the ongoing discussions or negotiations. I know there's a difference now in what they all mean. With the Treasury on this principle, but is it the detail you're arguing with them, or have they agreed the principle that in fact if we have a reduced corporation tax, that produces employment and growth in the economy, they get the benefits of the income tax and national insurance? Is that not agreed in principle?
Well, it's a recognised economic implication. That's
But
essentially.
do they recognise it?
Well, it's recognised in that that's the reason why we're doing it. We're seeking to reduce corporation tax to increase economic activity, and with increased employment and prosperity, there is a recognition that that is going to have an impact on other tax shields. So the effect is recognised. What isn't agreed at this point in time is whether or not that's reflected and estimated and as part of the block adjustment.
Will they not agree that in principle that is fair?
They haven't at this point. It was something that was discussed back in 2012 as part of the Joint Ministerial Working Group on this, and it was left as in the report to the Prime Minister from the working group that there were a number of unresolved issues, and that was one of them in terms of how those costs would be treated. As I said, the Treasury hasn't said that they're not going to take those into account. Equally, it hasn't said that they will. in discussions, they just have, one of their concerns is that it's difficult to estimate those and what they will be.
I appreciate that, you see, and I think the difficulty has been that because of the difficulties, the fact they can't separate these out, they've tended to drop the whole issue, and that's why I wonder if the principle was agreed, never mind the detail at this stage. The principle arguably should have been decided at the outset. It's fair and reasonable. Do you not agree? Then we'll be working maybe under slightly better conditions and still fighting about what the details are, because I would guess that the Treasury are probably frightened of the magnitude if they don't know the detail.
Well, it's certainly something that our ministers on the Northern Ireland side have pressed on before in the Joint Ministerial Working Group, and the agreement wasn't reached at that stage, and we will continue to try and see if we can get that reflected in some way in the block adjustment. But yes, there's, if there, once agreement on that would drive down the cost.
That's a fair thing. But anyway, the second point, Chair, is actually the implementation. You do touch in your paper on that, the implementation of a lower corporation tax. Surely, if in fact it's agreed, that is sufficient for business considering FDI. In fact, it's going to happen because they have a long gestation period as well. And in fact, you mentioned there the details might take 2 years to work out. But whatever that period is, I believe we can get the benefit of the reduced rate without any cost because you don't implement it straight away. Is that not true?
Yes, certainly. The key thing will be once there's devolution, the executive have signalled in the programme for government that the commitment is to secure the power and then to reduce the rate. There is an agreement at the executive as to what the rate will be. So obviously investors will look to see once we've got the power, what are we going to do with it. But you're quite right. If there was an announcement from the executive that they were going to reduce the rate to a certain level by a certain time frame, then investors could build that into their planning decisions and could say, well, we are going to start making plans to come to Northern Ireland in 2 years, 2017, 2018. So you're right there.
So when you implement it, that's when the costs will sort of actually come, and by that time, hopefully, you'll have the.
Yeah, and that'll be a key consideration for the executive in terms of how you reduce the rate. Now there will be some. We're looking at this at the reduction in the rate to both drive FDI, but then also to encourage greater economic activity in the local indigenous space. But yes, you're right in terms of those foreign FDI flows. Yeah,
you're still talking about basically the big ones or the banks and people like that at the moment who would benefit from a cut in the rate at present. Wouldn't be just too worried about them at this point in time. Thanks, Chair.
Martin?
Good to hear a radical voice raised there, Leslie. Thanks, Tony and William, for joining us. You said there that we want to have the corporation tax devolved to encourage economic growth, and of course that's true in the round, and I heard the Minister yesterday for the economy predicting 40,000 jobs. But actually, economic growth in itself is wonderful, but what we really want is we want jobs. We want sustainable jobs. We want well-paid jobs. We want jobs that can be spread out perhaps at a broader geographic spread than heretofore. Has there been any thought given to the type of jobs we might draw in under the devolution of corporation tax? Our colleagues across the border have had great success with the Pfizers, the Boston Scientifics, of late the Googles, the Twitters, the Facebook, the LinkedIns. What jobs do you think we will bring in because of this? And will they be value-added jobs? Will they be jobs which will make a difference?
Yeah, well, that's a key motivating factor for reducing corporation tax, because it's reducing the tax on profits. You're attracting more profitable activities. The criticism that perhaps has been kind of levied in the past is that some of the jobs that were coming in were perhaps relatively lower value added and not in those kind of high profit sectors. Now we have seen a change. Certainly, SNI in recent years has been very successful in bringing in higher value added jobs, but this will only strengthen the skewing of the nature of FDI in those sectors that are more productive, paying higher salaries, and in a broader range of sectors. You know, at the moment, you know, we've been very successful in, you know, back office, you know, FDI in terms of servicing the banks and IT jobs. We would be more attractive to a broader range of high value added, high paying companies with corporation tax.
And I suppose to follow up on that, and the Minister serves praise as well, because yesterday, by my count, was 66 job announcements since April. I only know it's 66 because when the CEO of Invest NI was here 3 weeks ago, it was at 64, and there's been 2 since. And that's clearly a feather in a cap and a great recognition of the work that Invest NI is doing. Would you agree that the hard work actually will only start when corporation tax is devolved? Because it seems to me there's a lot of devil in the detail, but also we need to really understand ourselves what we're going to do. None of us want to create jobs and have the benefits and income tax go straight to London. They're squeezing us hard enough as it is at the minute. And I attended the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce breakfast yesterday morning, where Business United around corporation tax, but it seems to me that it's important that we say to business as well that when the corporation tax is devolved, we can get a deal this week, and some of us are unhappy the way that was presented, but setting that to the side, if corporation tax is devolved, would you agree that you guys have your hardest work will be ahead of you?
The word, yes, absolutely. It's been a long journey to get to where we are now, and there's been a lot of work to get us here. But certainly, you know, this is a very powerful economic lever, and not just ourselves in DFP, but across the executive departments, we need to make sure that we're well placed to capitalise on that. So, you know, there's a job for Invest NI in terms of going out and marketing and ensuring that we're attracting in the businesses. In terms of skills are going to be vital. If we're going to bring in these high value added firms, we need to make sure that we've got the workforce there that are able to take advantage of those jobs. So yes, there's a huge opportunity for the executive, but we really need to make sure that we're there to capitalise on it.
Well, since you're so keen to do work, it also seems to me that there's a possibility that we enter in a new era of job creation here. The Minister talked about 40,000 jobs, which would be absolutely, if not miraculous, would be a formidable achievement by any administration. Do you think that the DFP and your colleagues across departments would be up for the challenge of trying to get a greater spread of economic growth? Our friends across the border in IDA, the criteria is 50% outside Dublin and Cork of FDI, new jobs created. Do you feel that this may be an opportunity for us, these 40,000 jobs and the economic growth to be more evenly spread? And of course, I'm thinking of North and West Belfast and west of the Bann in particular.
Well, certainly we'd like to, you know, we'd like to see prosperity levels increase across Northern Ireland. You know, it'll be an issue for Daddy and Invest NI to see how they can promote particular areas and how that prosperity is shared. But certainly, you know, we'd like to see kind of rising tide lifting all boats. What it will do is it will change the nature of the investment that we're going to get in. At the moment, a lot of it is very focused on, you know, providing kind of financial IT services. What you've seen in the south, and I'm no expert in this, your colleagues in Derry would be, and Invest NI would be better placed to advise. But if you look at the example in the south, where, you know, there is more high tech, advanced manufacturing and so on, which maybe aren't particularly suited to, you know, a city centre location, and perhaps if we're able to attract more of those sorts of investments, there may be the potential for those to locate, you know, outside the narrow.
Can we promote this man?
I'm happy for that to go on the record. So, what is it?
Thank you, Chair.
Adrian?
Yeah, I was along the same lines as Martin asked there, but just wanted to say that how do we ensure there's a fair spread across the north, that we don't get it all in Belfast, you know, in the northwest region.
Where's that? Northeast.
Strabane,
Strabane, right round the Coleraine and Ballymoney, right round that whole area, you know, it's been a...
Yeah, well, I'm conscious of very much straying into Derry Invest NI.
Yeah, and I understand that as well.
Territory in terms of how different parts of Northern Ireland are promoted. Essentially, what I'm sure Invest NI will be seeking to do if we have, you know, and they're already doing, I have no doubt, but with corporation taxes promoting Northern Ireland as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we would like to see people who live across Northern Ireland benefit as much as is possible from increased prosperity that will come from this.
But I think I'll take a bit of another thinking to get that as well, to get these big firms to think outside Belfast. Like that's what I'm saying, and it has to come from maybe yourselves and Derry. You know, some sort of joint meeting to get something set up there.
No, there's a big challenge there.
Yeah.
Tony, we took evidence from Professor Gerald Holton in regard to our Barnett formula review, and we noted about the potential need for additional borrowing flexibility, because obviously we need to guard against budgetary shocks from the variation of the rate, and having the ability to borrow more money to offset any reduction in the budget may be something we need to look at. Is there a departmental view on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, as you've seen now, the past number of years have been, you know, quite unique in recent history. But if you look at corporation tax receipts going back, you know, to 2007-8, they were hugely volatile, given the impact of the downturn. Now, I would like to think that we're not going to see that sort of volatility again in the short to medium term future. But you need to have mechanisms there. You know, there will be short term volatility, not with fluctuations of the same degree, but yes, you need to be able to manage that. So we will need short-term some mechanism to manage that volatility, because yes, you need, and you know, you don't know where, you know, what the tax slip's going to be next year. You can forecast it, but so you need to ensure that you can manage your
The more
budget.
control you have over that, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michaela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies I missed your presentation, Tony. Just in terms of the small businesses and the SMEs, obviously everybody will benefit, but already you're hearing out there amongst the small businesses, and indeed Marcin and others alluded to the west of it, and indeed my own area. What benefits will there be for small businesses?
Well, small businesses will have, you know, in terms, they will be eligible for the regime. It was agreed at the Joint Ministerial Working Group that, you know, small businesses, they would be treated as either in or out of the regime, depending on whether they're located in Northern Ireland and whether their activity is based in Northern Ireland. So what we want to see is a regime there where there's lower administrative burden for those small firms. But, you know, at the moment they're paying the current tax rate, which is 21%. They're going to see that reduced to a particular level that the executive may decide. That will give them more cash, which they can reinvest in their business, will improve cash flow. So yes, there's certainly advantages here and benefits for small businesses across the region.
Thanks, Tony.
In terms of the timetable for this, Tony, I mean, if there's any slippage, you're obviously facing into the Westminster election. And, you know, you could have any number of combinations in terms of a rainbow coalition in Westminster. You know, how is the department planning for that scenario? Because obviously parties across the water would have different views in terms of, you know, Labour and the Tories clearly have different views in terms of the transfer of corporation tax. So how is the department preparing for that?
We're still working, Chair, on the basis that we're going to get this legislation introduced and passed in the current Parliament. In the autumn statement, the Chancellor said that, you know, subject to satisfactory progress, whatever that may deem to be, that they would introduce the legislation immediately after, and there's time in the current Parliament to get this through and get royal assent beforehand. So we're working to do it with this government.
Is there
not
time?
the next.
Is the question.
In terms of the time, well, the government, the officials and the Chancellor have said that it's possible to do it in this Parliament.
Because a cynical view would be that the Chancellor perhaps has set this up to fail because of the conditionality that's been attached to the offer. So,
Wasn't our accord.
I mean, what's the department's view in terms of? I mean, obviously you'd be aware of how legislation in Westminster can be delayed and be subject to timetables. You know, how tight is it going to be? Is what I'm trying to ask.
It is. There's not a lot of scope for slippage, if I can say it, in terms of the various stages that we're going to go through. The legislation is drafted as what's termed a money bill. So it has to go through the House of Lords. There's a time limit as far as I'm not a legislative expert, but it has to go through the House of Lords within a month of being passed through the House of Commons. So it's a piece of legislation that is designed to go through more quickly than perhaps others, a more standard bill.
The difficulty we have is it's dependent upon, I know why the Christmas deadline was set, because effectively the 7th of June is a date that or the 7th of January is a date that a lot of stuff has to be through, and I think that has to go to the House of Lords by the 15th of January. You know, it's the middle of January. That has to be raised through the House of Lords, and if we have not progressed, they can progress it to a certain stage, but if we haven't dotted our I's and stroked our T's, effectively the thing could fall on the point of condition applied by the Chancellor.
Tony, there's one thing hasn't been touched on yet, and that what is the department's view on displacement or brass plating? How are you going to handle that?
Well, that's something that we've been working very closely with HMRC on in terms of developing the design of the new regime. In terms of bearing the full fiscal consequences, the costs, there are behavioural costs built into the cost estimate. It's in our interest to see those as low as possible. So the regime has been developed in a way to reflect the fact that there will be a differential rate in Northern Ireland, which will be an incentive for companies to take advantage of that, to minimise their tax bill. So the regime has been designed in a way to control that, to ensure that that sort of activity is minimised and that the costs that we incur there are as small as possible. Right. So there's a lot of detail there when we see the draft bill.
Has work been done?
Oh yes, absolutely. That's something we've been very mindful of, because obviously with the lower rate in Northern Ireland, companies will naturally try and minimise their tax bill. So we have to put controls and checks in place to ensure that doesn't.
Big danger is it doesn't actually move, but they actually have a subsidiary which happens to be the head office.
Yeah, yes, no, the regime's being developed particularly with that in mind to ensure that, as I said at the outset, one of the key objectives of this is to ensure that we have a regime that is designed that's attractive to business, but that generates genuine economic activity, not just a transferring of shifting profits from one part of from GB to Northern Ireland.
Well, actually, be both losers, both jurisdictions, wouldn't benefit from that.
Yes, no, so it's certainly something we've been trying to guard against.
Thank you, sir. That's fine.
Okay, members, moving on to the next session. Could I first of all seek agreement to copy the Department's briefing to the Committee for ETI for information?
Yep, great.
Okay, building a prosperous and united community update.
Again, don't want to. I'm not delighted too long.
You get a drink of water there.
Yep. Take time. Don't want to say too much by way of opening remarks again. We get quickly questions because I know this is something the committee have touched on in the past. We have been examining the potential to devolve the additional fiscal powers over and above corporation tax. We've been looking at a broad range of taxes and levies that are currently applied and assessing these against two conditions, really, for the purpose of conducting our analysis. Firstly, whether or not the devolution of the tax or the duty and a departure from the prevailing UK rate would give us a policy lever that would result in a clear economic or social benefit. And secondly, looking at the affordability and the impact of taking such an action, what would that have on the funding available for other public services? And in doing this, there's quite a substantial body of work that's been undertaken. We've looked at the background and the basis of the tax. There's obviously a lot of work that's been undertaken by the various commissions in Scotland and Wales, looking at devolution in their own context, and we've looked to see what they have done and the findings that they have come to, and then looking at the possible options that there might be if we were to devolve a particular tax or levy. What might we do with it to try and generate some, or to achieve some sort of economic or social benefit, and then looking at the administrative issues. So we've done that across the broad range of the main taxes and duties that there are. We're in the process of, and I know the committee had sent us correspondence asking whether or not it would be possible to see the assessments that we've done to date. We're actually in the process of updating those now, because there's been quite a bit of movement over the past month. We've had the Smith Commission at the end of November, which set out their findings and recommendations for further devolution to Scotland, and also even in the autumn statement where there have been changes to our passenger duty and stamp duty. So we're in the process of updating those assessments and reflecting those recent developments in. it'll be for the Minister ultimately to make recommendations to the executive on the way forward, and obviously corporations in terms of the second of those two criteria that we're looking at in our own assessments. Obviously, the position of corporation tax is a key consideration in terms of affordability and what that might mean for any block adjustment and management of that. So that's essentially where we are on that piece of work, Chair.
When's this due to go to the executive?
There isn't a timetable at this point in time. Obviously, we're looking to do that as soon as possible, but we haven't set we haven't set deadline as such.
And can that be brought to the committee before it goes to the executive?
Well, we have advice. We have initial advice with the Minister, essentially just informing him where we are with the work. We'll be updating that and putting it back to him. And my sense would be it would be for him to take a position and put it to the executive. But that's something we could get the Minister's view on.
Would you advise him to go to the committee first? As would be best practice.
We can certainly take his view on that.
Okay. Just, you made reference to a couple of things. Obviously, air passenger duty has been reduced for children. It's under 12 and then under 16 over a certain period of time. So I suppose that would make the cost of the full transfer of that per year less. So be less of a leap to make in terms of the executive if it wanted that power. So could you give us a view on where the department is in regard to that, and also in terms of the Smith Commission? What's your read on it in terms of the consequences for here?
Just before moving off that, the fact of the APD, we did take a £5 million hit for the long haul. Consequential. Not all the people who are taking advantage of that across the Atlantic are adults.
Yeah, good point.
I wonder, is there a possibility there could be a readjustment in relation to that consequential of the long haul aspect of APD?
Yeah, well, on the first kind of point you made, Chair, certainly it's something that we're looking at. We need to, I suppose, the first question that we need to get the answer to, and we're looking to see if we can get the figures on this, is to get an estimate of what does that actually mean in terms of how much tax is generated by children travelling as opposed to adults, and how much does that save? So that's a key figure that we need to see and factor into the assessment to see how much would it bring the cost down by if we were to seek devolution. And yes, certainly we would want to see any changes in terms of how the tax is levied in the UK reflected any adjustment or costs that are applied to us.
Even if it was 10%, it's 500 million. Or it's 500 million.
Yeah, we're just slightly lower. The actual block adjustment that's applied at the moment, I think, is below 5. It's 2 to 3 million, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's slightly lower. I haven't seen I don't have the figures to hand, but it's below 5.
And Smith?
Smith, well, yes, it's. I suppose in terms of the assessment that we're undertaking, it's against those two criteria. So it's whether devolution and changing of a tax rate will provide us with an economic lever to change economic or social outcomes, and what the cost of that will be. Now, in terms of feeding in, and there's as much of this is for context and for ministers to be aware of what's happening, in the other regions. The Smith Commission is pushing ahead with, or is recommending further devolution over and above that which was previously agreed for Scotland. So there's a more fundamental devolution of income tax proposed, where the Scottish Parliament will be able to change both the rates and the banding structure. They're proposing APD devolution and a share of VAT receipts. So Scotland's are coming at it from a slightly different position, whereby one of the things that they're looking at is how they can increase financial accountability. Not just looking at these as economic levers. So in terms of the analysis, at this point what we're looking at is how effective would these be and what would the cost of they be, or cost of devolving them be. Obviously it would be a decision for ministers then to take as well, as to what extent would it want to increase financial or fiscal accountability. Obviously one of the things in the Smith Commission, they're not taking forward corporation tax devolution. So if we do secure corporation tax devolution powers, we are taking on a significant chunk of tax receipts and will be accountable for those. So it's playing in that background into the consideration of ministers.
Okay, any other questions, members?
If we're taking on responsibility for the collection of that tax receipt, what way does that work out cost-wise? Because they obviously are HMRC employees. Would that be attributed to us, the cost, and would that be offset against the adjustment within the package?
We will have to pay the administration costs associated with that. So the view at the minute in terms of the discussions we're having corporation tax is that we continue to be administered by HMRC, and then we would pay the additional costs that are incurred by HMRC in running our default regime.
Okay.
Okay. No further questions? Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for that. And we move on now to item number 7, which is the policy evaluation of the small business rate relief scheme. We have a briefing from DFP and the Ulster University Economic Policy Centre, which was formerly the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy. So we have allocated about 45 minutes for this, so it should bring us up to 12 o'clock. Okay, so the witnesses there.
We just wait on officials. Just correspondence, we're waiting on officials still.
Okay. So in the meantime, while we're waiting on the officials, I'll ask the clerk to deal with correspondence.
Okay, Chair. I'll just review some of the correspondence, Chair, because we need one more member before we can make any decisions.
Okay.
So I think that's the question. I should just go ahead.
Right. Okay. I think we're in a position now to move ahead, and I want to welcome Brian McClure, Head of Rating Policy Division, Central Finance Group, DFP, and Richard Johnson, Associate Director of University of Ulster Economic Policy Centre. So I'll ask Brian to lead.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chair. For a change, I'm not going to say too much this morning. I'm going to leave most of the talking to my colleague, Richard Johnson from the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy. But just by way of introduction, I think it's worth saying a little bit about the scheme. It was first introduced in April 2010 and extended twice. It was a downturn measure, and the legislation says that it comes to an end on the 31st of March 2015.
Okay.
So hence the need for the evaluation that the Department commissioned. Just a couple of comments. DFP is satisfied with the rigour of NICEP's work. We have left them to it. The Department has not interfered in, well, I'll let Richard confirm that, but the Department has not interfered in the formulation of the report or the recommendations. So it is a wholly independent evaluation that has been undertaken. In terms of the Department's current position, it broadly accepts NICEP's recommendation to keep the scheme in its present form next year. And the budget proposals reflect that, because there is provision of £20 million for next year. But that is out for consultation, so no decisions have been made until that consultation on the budget has concluded.
Okay.
I suppose the big question is what happens in April 2016. And that's maybe something you'd like to discuss this morning and tease out in this session with Richard as to what NICEP's views are on that. So that's my introduction.
Thanks
I'll
very
pass
much,
over to Richard.
Okay, Richard, do you want to make an opening statement?
Morning. Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to present the research, and I would also like to record our thanks to the 5 main political parties for their participation in the evaluation process. As Brian has said, it's an independent report. We were very much left to our own devices to carry out the research, formulate the conclusions. The process, we included a survey, a public consultation. We had a targeted consultation with a number of the main stakeholders, business bodies, councils and such. We had an analysis of LPS data, carried out a literature review, and we looked at the schemes that are in place in other parts of the UK. The main findings that we had were that it was an appropriate anti-recessionary policy for its time. It was introduced in 2010 when Northern Ireland was in the teeth of the recession. A very large number of small awards were made to a number of small businesses. It cost around 47 million from 2010 to 2014. And it was well liked, especially the automatic award system that was in place, because it reduced bureaucracy both for government and for businesses. However, it was difficult to identify significant qualitative and quantitative economic outcomes or economic benefits, and some thought that the scheme in fact should not have been evaluated from an economic perspective because it was used as an anti-recessionary measure. As Brian has noted, our recommendation is that the scheme is retained in its current form for a further year, and the recommendation was that the costs were capped at 17.3 million, which was the cost for 2014. As Brian has noted, the DFP budget process has included a provision for 20 million to allow for the adjustments for revaluation. We've recommended that it is phased out as economic conditions improve, potentially over 3 years, and that a wider review of the rating system to look at the objectives, incentives and all the reliefs in tandem should be considered. Following on from that, we've suggested that there should be a more targeted scheme focused on growth, potentially something that would be an application-based scheme, and also that a rating policy model should be developed, and that's in addition to the work that's already carried out by the team in Rating Policy Division around sort of the impact of all the reliefs, all the benefits and the system and how it works for everyone.
Okay. Yeah, you said it was introduced as an anti-recessionary measure, and that I think that it has now served its purpose and should be faded out. After the recent reval, a lot of businesses are complaining still about rates, and it seemed to me that if this scheme were to be withdrawn, that they would see it as an added blow, and although the recession may not be as bad as it was when this was introduced, we now have austerity staring us on the face, so perhaps we need this scheme as an anti-austerity measure to further support businesses. But anyway, when it comes to the cap, you've said that should be set at 17.3 million. How did you arrive at that figure?
The cap, there were two reasons for that. The cap is to keep the scheme as it is at this point in time, and the second reason is to do with austerity, to ensure that the scheme itself didn't increase in terms of cost pressures from DFP, to maintain costs at the current level rather than grow the scheme.
Okay. I think it's worth mentioning, Deputy Chair, that provision has been made for 20 million in the draft budget, and the reason for that is that the values have increased due to the revaluation. Overall, the value of the new valuation list will be 8% more than the current valuation list. So that's to allow for a little bit of wriggle room in relation to keeping the scheme in its present form next year, but it also takes account of some of the outcomes of the consultation that we're undertaking in relation to this evaluation, where we asked the question whether people would prefer the keeping the scheme after the reval or having a transitional relief scheme for the revaluation. So all of those factors have led to an increased provision above NICEP's recommendation of 20 million. But it is still a budget proposal. The decision hasn't been finalised on it next year. But I would certainly agree with your assessment that
businesses could find themselves on the wrong side of the revaluation and also lose out in small business rate relief. And that is certainly one of the key considerations in agreeing to keep it in its present form next year, because of the effect of that. Plus, there are other things happening, such as rates convergence, district rates convergence. And of course, there are other wider considerations which follow on from the discussions earlier this morning at this committee in relation to the budget and also in relation to corporation tax. So for all of those reasons, and Richard can confirm NICEP's assessment of that, but our assessment is that next year would not be the time to remove it.
Certainly not. And whether the following year would be.
Well, that's what I say. That's the magic question. You know, what should we have in April 16? Given that NICEP's conclusion is that it's not a prime economic lever in the same sense as some of the corporation tax discussions this morning, and that there's no measurable economic outcome. It is certainly a very popular scheme, and it does, of course, benefit those that avail of it.
Yeah. Well, there certainly was a perception among the business community, and we heard this, many radio broadcasts at the time. I think there was a supposition that the reval was going to lead to a reduction in rates, and I think many people are now discovering that that wasn't the case for them. So they feel, as it were, let down by the reval. And as I say, if this were to be removed on top of that, they would be suffering a double whammy. And as I say, with the reductions in public spending and so on, the economic landscape, even though the recession may have receded slightly, has not been transformed to an extent where people would agree that the scheme could be removed. Anyway,
I mean, we fully accept that, but it does add the whole affordability issue. It puts that into real focus now, because these are hard times for public expenditure in Northern Ireland, and most departments are facing quite dramatic cuts in relation to the budget proposals. This has a £20 million a year price tag associated with it. So, and it's not just a next year issue for public expenditure, it's for subsequent years as well. So it does bring into sharp focus the affordability and the priority of the scheme. And I think the NICEP's work has been very timely in terms of helping to inform decisions for the future.
Okay.
I think as
Paul.
well, sorry,
Sorry, John.
go back to the
Richard,
point
sorry.
that you made about the economic landscape. I think as the landscape changes, the policy environment should also change.
Yes.
If Northern Ireland in 2 years' time finds itself back in more difficult times, austerity bites and consumer demand contracts, this may be a scheme that the executive would want to revisit in its current form or something similar. If the economy continues to grow, the objective would be to use the system to try and encourage growth rather than help people out in difficult times. I think that is a very important point, that we adapt our policies to what we need to do at that point in time, and we're clear about the objective and why we do those things.
Sounds sensible. Paul?
Thank you very much. I feel that maybe a lot of businesses aren't maybe aware of exactly the benefits they are receiving from it, because it was quite a blunt tool. You either were below a certain rate and valuation and you got the benefits of having the reduction upon your rates, and some of them have just taken it for granted now. I think that's part of the way of looking at it. But because our economy is made up primarily of small to medium-sized business, which can take advantage of it, I think, yes, it warrants a look at it from a longer term to see if there's a possibility that we can change the scheme maybe to be more focused, but that would increase our administration costs. Administrative costs were calculated at about £500,000, is that correct? 480,000 or something?
The administrative costs worked out at £35 per simple application or £115 per complex application, and those were figures that we received from LPS during the evaluation process. So yes, if we move to an application-based process, there certainly will be a cost on government.
It would increase the cost of it, and I think I'm not necessarily sure that the wider public have been sold the full ideas and benefits that they've received from this process, because there are businesses who've told me they would not be there. Some businesses have told me, look, I wouldn't have made it through 2 years ago if I hadn't have got that. We lived through a very difficult time of cash flow, and they're still there today. So that's saying you can't maybe calculate those benefits on a pound rates basis. Is there any mechanism that we have to actually, and appreciate it's probably the department will have to commission a body of work where we could actually focus more towards those businesses, because there's some very small businesses working and making very big profits in small property, taking advantage of the 20% discount that don't necessarily need it.
Yeah, I think the point about use the word blunt, it is a sort of cover-all scheme, and that level of bluntness, if you want to put it that way, is actually part of its strength and also its Achilles heel, because it makes it an easy scheme to administer, a cheap scheme to administer, both from a business and a government perspective.
We received a certain amount of backlash because of the way this scheme was funded, because we actually did put a large store levy on, and those that are successful, some successful businesses, were seen to be subsidising the less well off, and we got a certain amount of backlash in that. And that's one area where, I don't necessarily think we should be penalising those who actually are successful.
And I suppose in terms of the recommendation for the application-based system, it's to actually target the scheme more to those in need, because there are people who are quite profitable who don't necessarily need the help, and there are other businesses that do need it. So the point about that is that we would like to see the aid going to those who need it most, for whether it's about growth or cash flow, whatever the policy objective is, to try and sort of sift those out. You could in fact be more generous to a smaller group if you could sift them out to identify who those in need were most, whether it's people in cash flow difficulties or people who are investing in skills or employment.
Suffice to say, I think it's good to keep it in place over a period of time while we go through the transition of the reval process and how that's all going to tease out. And I think that is exactly the tool that we should have there. But I think there should be wider engagement with. And I don't necessarily rule out having some contact with HMRC in relation to identifying profitable businesses, which are necessarily not going to take the full benefits. They don't need the full benefits of such a subsidised scheme. That is subsidised, and on the basis of that. But that's a wider debate. But it's something which.
Yeah, I suppose if we go back to the objective of the scheme,
to get us through the recession.
It was to get you through the recession. There were limited specific targets around what we'd hope to get out of the scheme for Northern Ireland. So if we had you could have a social objective in around post offices for rural areas. You could have the economic objectives about growth, so if it's investing in capital or employment or skills.
Those are areas I think need to be looked at.
Or we could look at potentially anti-recessionary. Is it a cash flow issue? But each of those schemes would be a slightly different iteration of the policy itself.
Yeah, but I think had this scheme not been put in place, I think our high street would have been different. It would have been different than what it is even, had it not been put in place. So I think that, we can see the benefits of what was there, whether you deem it to be from a public perspective, but I think, with the wider community will see the benefits of what has been put there. And we need to sell it as something which we believe did deliver what it was set in place to do. And I think it was an initiative which has worked quite successfully. And I haven't read the report, but I hope and pray, and I will take a chance to go through it, hope and pray that what you've come back as a feedback bears that out.
Well, we did consult widely, and we had a very good level of conversation with NIRTA, the British Retail Consortium, a number of district councils, and they all put forward their perspective on how it had helped businesses and how it had helped in their sector. Some of the views were that it had helped a small amount. Some of people said maybe help them keep 1 or 2 employees, help them fix up signs, that sort of thing. But
we realised that the scheme wasn't getting enough, a catch-all. So that's why it had to be increased from £5,000, you know, where we increased the rateable valuation up to 10, and then, you know, that had to be done to get a wider catchment, because the high street was basically very few were under the rateable value, so nobody could take advantage of it.
And if we look at the sectoral breakdown, the shops, retail, wholesale was an area that did benefit significantly. The consultation process revealed a lot of views in terms of how the scheme should operate and who should benefit. There was support for a city centre or town centre first policy. There was support for out-of-town retail. There was support for sort of looking at localised areas. There was support for DFP in fact taking the tax and then redistribute it into a local economic development agency, so they would have the power to give out money to certain businesses for specific activities. So we had a very good conversation with a range of stakeholders, and there were a number of views put forward really in terms of how the scheme could operate, really almost every option you'd think of in terms of how it could be operated.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Leslie.
Mr. Chair, 2 points. The first one, the large retail levy, that goes now on the 1st of April.
Yes, there's no doubt about that, Mr. Cree, and the Minister's been very clear about this. The revaluation has actually rebalanced the ratings. So some of the those that had to pay the levy are going to face significant increases as a consequence of the revaluation. Some of the Tesco stores are going up 40% in value, and the levy was levied at 15%. So that's going to go, and the revaluation, although I do accept what the Deputy Chair has said about some unexpected results from the revaluation, broadly speaking, it has done a job in terms of redistributing within retail. Larger food-based retailers are paying significantly more. Many high streets are paying significantly, or will be paying significantly less. So I can certainly, although our position, or the Department's position in relation to small business rate relief is still undecided because we're at a consultation of the budget, I can say that large retail levy is off the table.
That's a given. Okay.
Yep.
And I think the scheme has worked, but the scheme now that we're recommending continuing, does that continue at the maximum discounted rate that obtains in the current year?
Yeah, well, if our current working assumption is, and we're very interested in what the committee's view on this, is that it continues in its present form next year, 20% at the same thresholds.
Right. So still continue.
So there are those that will qualify because of a slight increase in values across the board. It will cost a little bit more to even retain it at its current thresholds next year.
That's all in the 20 million.
But that's in the 20 million. That will pay for the same scheme next year.
Okay, that's the first point.
Again, subject to consultation.
Okay, that's good to clarify that.
Yeah.
Have it on the record.
Yep.
The second point is, and I've been wondering about this for some time, just what effect will rate convergence have on this?
Well, anybody that's entitled to small business rate relief next year, assuming it does continue next year, will still get their subsidy in those areas that are affected. That is mostly ratepayers in Castlereagh, in Fermanagh, in Strabane, in Coleraine, in Dungannon, and a few other places. But those are the main beneficiaries of the subsidy from the rates converge. They will still get that.
Plus.
Because it will be an adjustment to the district rate.
They'll be that much better.
So there will be no netting off in terms of benefit. Anybody that would be entitled to any scheme that occurs next year will still will get their entitlement, plus they will get the subsidy for those ratepayers who currently reside in those areas.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Leslie. Watching Case Duggets at that?
Can you ask Hurley? I want to say one of the reasons I was in favour of this when I think it was Minister Wilson introduced it was I'm a big fan of flexibility.
Minister Dodds.
Mr. Dodds. I'm a big fan of flexibility in taxation or rates, whatever, that we try and use them as economic levers. And in that context, I think we all as a committee will watch carefully the effect of this revaluation of rates across the city, because one of the reasons shops wouldn't go into High Street, and High Street in the city centre was because it wasn't the rents were too high, it was the rates were too high. and we may end up with a situation where we're just moving that to another part of the city. One of my big interests in this small business rate relief was trying to get empty shops populated. Trying to, you know, I drove into Portadown one evening and I was amazed at the number of charity shops, obviously not paying rates, number of empty shops. Affects community, affects morale, real drag, I think, on the recovery. So that was one of the positives of this. Were you able to assess that at all? I mean, you spoke to 500 different recipients of this relief, but did it make an impact on getting small businesses into premises which were vacant before that?
Well, those let Richard speak in a moment, but those empty properties would not be entitled to small business rate relief, so it doesn't actually apply to empty properties. But as you know, there is a special scheme for those setting up on long-term empty shops, that is, or shops at similar premises in town centres. They will get 50% off their rates in the first year for those that have been lying empty for a year or more. And that's a special scheme that was introduced in Northern Ireland and has now been copied throughout the UK. We also have 50% empty property relief. So the standard rate for an empty property, be it an office, a shop, or whatever, is 50% here, compared to 90% in Scotland and 100% in England and Wales. So they pay full rates more or less. In the rest of the UK, you only pay 50% rates. So there's two measures that we have in Northern Ireland that are different from elsewhere, and I think they can be fully justified given the higher vacancy rates that we have here.
I suppose you saw the letter in the Irish News last week from Mr. Murdoch about the issue of rates.
Rupert Murdoch?
No, not Rupert. No, Patrick Murdoch. He was making the point that the rates in England, business rates in England, in town centres are much lower than they are here, and that there is a much more competitive business environment in town centres in England than here.
Well, there may well be in relation to that second point, but in relation to the first point, comparing like with like, we have no evidence that there's any difference in rates paying compared to similar properties elsewhere. We have different valuation dates. The current valuation list that we have is based in 2001 values, whereas the current valuation list in England is based in 2008 values. But the significant point here is that we're proceeding with a revaluation, and the current valuation list they have in England is kind of pre-downturn. So we will be introducing a valuation list that reflects a downturn in various sectors, and that is not the case in England. So I would dispute that almost on all counts, I think.
Okay. That's interesting. Can I just ask you about the NICEP's findings in relation to the areas of the region that had the highest proportion of firms in difficulty? It was basically north, south and west. I think the figures around about 33%. Was there any consideration given to focusing the relief on those areas which were hardest hit?
Not in the current scheme, because it was a blanket relief effectively across Northern Ireland, so everybody, regardless of any geographical area, got the same relief. Again, in the future, if we're looking at businesses that are more in need, if that was the scheme and the objective was to say if your cash flow is decreased by X% or you are in difficulty, apply for this relief and you will, subject to approval, be granted it. That would certainly help those businesses that are in difficulty regardless of the area, but it certainly would help the north, south and western areas of Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Well, and just if you break it down by sector, the hotels and the hospitality industry, they seem to be hardest hit. And I mean, we have the Canal Court Hotel in Newry. When I looked at the reval and the bill for that, you know, it's mind-boggling, and you wonder how they managed to survive at all, especially given the fact that their sister hotel across the border has much lower VAT rate to deal with. So was there any consideration given to that particular sector, which is under huge pressure, especially in the border areas where, you know, there are other establishments quite close at hand which are available to customers. Was there any consideration given to targeting a particular sector?
Again, that is one of the options that could be considered in the future. What we've recommended is that, you know, a future targeted scheme could be considered. Now, if we want to look at sectors, I think we could find evidence that there are, in every sector, there are firms in difficulty and there are firms doing well. There are winners and losers within all of those groups because they're quite clunky groupings of companies. Effectively, some hotels will be doing quite well, some may not be. It certainly is an option.
You know, when you look at some of the rates bills, you would need to be doing very well in order to pay the rates bills alone.
It certainly is an option that could be considered. The question is, do you want to grow Northern Ireland by generating exports and bringing in money from abroad? Or is it something that's more domestically focused? Does it help hotels, restaurants, shops, the people who benefit from the FDI companies and everybody else spending the money in the broader economy?
Well, you could argue that, you know, since tourism is one of the sectors that we're seeking to grow, if we had more competitive hotels and hospitality industry, we could attract more people in that way. But anyway, that's a debate for another day. Michaela.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you. I suppose the small business rate relief, and I've said it before, Brian, it comes, I suppose, as some way welcome in my own area, particularly people from rural areas and the businesses in rural areas. But and the Deputy Chairperson talked about options going forward, and Richard, you alluded to that. And I suppose just in terms of, I know my party expressed concerns around go-karting facilities. And, you know, obviously they do require larger premises, but they have a small turnover and a small number of employees. So maybe going forward and to the future, it would be beneficial to base the qualifications on turnover, if that would be a consideration. But just one thing that's come to my mind, and I see it, my town's no different than any other town, I'm sure, but just in relation to the charity shops, and I know some vacant properties, you know, have set up as charity shops, but I see that changing, and I'm aware of one charity shop that was a charity shop for a number of months, and there's now a shop maybe selling e-cigs. So how do you police that?
I suppose we can take the first point on the turnover and cost, and then pass to Brian for the charity shop point. In terms of turnover and cost, LPS have fantastic data on the rating system and the data that's required to run the rating system, but turnover or profitability is a separate business indicator that they do not hold within the business rating database. Now, either we link up two sets of data, one can take held by DETI statisticians or potentially revenue and customs with the revenue system. That would be a huge exercise and would be costly, or we move to an application-based scheme. But absolutely, it goes back to the point that we've discussed. There are some small businesses that are absolutely in need of rate relief, and there are other sort of larger businesses occupying low NAV properties who do benefit from it. So it's not necessarily based in need. The system is blunt, as some put it, or inflexible. That's both a strength and a weakness for the system itself. But there could be potentially, one option could be to look at the SPR, keep it as it is, and have an exception clause to say, now, if you are someone who is in a genuinely small business with a large NAV property and you don't qualify, then apply here, and that will be a smaller application scheme by exception rather than an application scheme for all, which may make the costs feasible for LPS.
Yeah, in relation to the policing of charity shops, the policy is that charity shops will pay rates in proportion to the amount of donated goods they sell. So if they sell a significant proportion of non-donated goods, they will pay rates. They should pay rates. And LPS has written to every charity shop in Northern Ireland this year and has asked them for those figures. Now, I don't know what the outcome of that review has been, but I can tell you they have written to each and every charity shop in Northern Ireland to confirm that what happens on the ground is what LPS thinks is on the ground. And as I say, the policy is that you should only get rate relief to the extent that you pay, that you sell donated goods. So if 70% of your turnover is donated goods, you get 70% exemption. Now, as it happens, most of them get 100% exemption. So LPS has, and it does this from time to time, but it has in recent months written to everyone. Now, I can't find out what has happened, what the outcome of that evaluation is. I mean, I don't work in LPS, so I don't know what adjustments they have made as a result of that. But that's how they're policing it. They're actually writing to everybody and asking for those figures. I mean, in relation to the targeted scheme, you know, I'm very interested in the views of this committee. There's first of all the affordability issue as to whether we think it is a priority to give £20 million a year of rate support to businesses, and if so, then what objective should that scheme have looking forward? Because it's very important to establish an overall objective, particularly one that maybe aligns with other policy areas in relation to corporation tax, in relation to just growing the economy and so on. So that almost needs to be decided before we can find a mechanism for doing it. And I think Richard's probably better qualified because he's talked to a lot of sectors about this as to how you could achieve it. There are significant difficulties because you either link in with other databases, and HMRC has been mentioned and various others. It sounds easy but is actually very difficult. Or people then have to apply and then provide some sort of written evidence. And then it has to be monitored, and there are issues. You know, you asked me about policing of charity shops. Well, you'd have to police any targeted rate relief scheme that people apply for. So there are downsides to that as well.
You wouldn't have the resources.
So all of these matters have to be considered. But I think as a first point, we need to decide, or my political masters need to decide whether they want to continue with a £20 million rate subsidy. And if they do decide that that is, you know, a priority, what the objective of that scheme should be. Because the objective of the current scheme is very woolly. We actually, as a department, think it has been a very effective safety valve for businesses during, you know, a prolonged economic downturn. Yeah. But the context has now changed, and that's really the question we were asking NICEP.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at the objective, post offices, absolutely from a social perspective, the relief was well received. People were very positive about that. From an economic perspective and linking it to the programme for government, if you want to increase productivity, profitability and wages effectively, it's about supporting investment. Do you get a rate relief for employing one more person, for investing in skills, for buying new capital equipment? And then how do you prove that? How do you police it again? So those would be the economic growth type objectives that we would see. And you could also have your anti-recessionary objective, that would be to help X number of businesses with cash flow issues. Excuse me. But really, the need drives the objective, and then the objective needs to be very specific in terms of how the policy itself set out and works out in the future.
Thanks.
But if ministers want us to look at a target scheme, probably the first thing we will do is to engage with the policy competent department, which is DETI, to have discussions with them as to how we could formulate options and formulate a range of objectives to put to ministers. So we are not experts in business support. We're you know, public finance people. So I think our first port of call would be to DETI to try and formulate some options and a range of objectives that ministers could decide on.
Can I ask you if there were to be a cut in corporation tax during the life of this scheme, would there be an overlap where some companies could benefit from both the small business rates relief scheme and from a cut corporation tax? Is that possible?
It is potentially possible, yes. You could have a company that is profitable in a low NAV property, but I would suggest that it will be a smallish proportion of the overall amount. You'll have a lot of companies that won't be paying corporation tax in small NAV properties, but there certainly is the potential for some overlap in both schemes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it all goes back to the affordability issue. You know, £20 million price tag with this. a book price tag anyway in relation to industrial de-rating of 60 million, a price tag associated with corporation tax. It depends who you talk to, but it seems to be into the hundreds of millions. So, something has to give, I think, in terms of deciding what priorities are, and I think that could easily, the thinking on that could easily affect the future of the scheme.
Well, the cut in corporation tax, generally speaking, is going to benefit the larger companies. If it happens, and if this scheme goes, there's going to be an imbalance there, whereby the bigger firms are going to have the benefit of corporation tax cut, whereas the smaller ones are will be denied what they previously had. So, would there be a potential imbalance there? Would there?
I think it's a very fair point, and that's something that could be considered. If the coverage of corporation tax cut in terms of the benefit is likely to be different from the coverage in this scheme, so there are issues around that. I think it's a fair point.
There is an argument, and it's something which I've been discussing with a number of individuals who've alluded to the fact that with a cut of corporation tax, there might well be an increase in employment. There will also be an increase upon spend on the high street, which is there to actually try and help. So you're going to actually, how that filters its way through, it will take time.
Yeah.
It might not happen over 2 or 3 years. That could take. That's why I think it's important to actually tease the thing through to see how it's all going to.
Absolutely, and if we look at all taxation policy, taxation policy obviously matters. It has an impact, and the question is which tax has the biggest impact for the least cost, and which combination of policies makes the most sense for Northern Ireland and its particular circumstances. So if we look at, we're only talking about corporation tax. We're not talking about air passenger duty or any other tax at the minute, but if we look at all the taxes, all the benefits, corporation tax should generate up to 40,000 jobs, as the Enterprise Minister said, by 2033. As those people spend, as those IT graduates spend their money in the broader economy, they go to the hotels, they go to the shops, the second round effects of that spending should help the domestic economy as well. It's about bringing in wealth from abroad and recirculating it within.
It's also going to be a huge benefit to the Treasury as well.
The VAT system, which effectively is similar to what each state in the United States put their tax on a sales tax. So therefore, and they don't actually have a valuation tax on square footage or the size of the property. It's dealt with on their turnover on a very blunt tool, and it seems to work quite effectively in a lot of areas. And I'm not so sure that.
And again, I suppose that's a different option, and would be costly for LPS.
That's an argument for.
Well, that's an argument for the review of business rates that the Minister has commissioned next year when the revaluation beds in, and we want to make a start to this in the spring. So, I mean, the option of a sales tax can be looked at. There are certain.
That's adding it to an existing sales tax that was brought in.
And that in itself raises a constitutional issue in terms of the power to do that. As the power that we currently have to raise taxes, anything that resembles a national tax is currently forbidden. But that whole debate is widened out now. So
that was a nightmare because it was brought in 1973 or 74 to deal with the EEC whenever we joined it, and everybody seen it as an EEC tax.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Treasury seen it as another opportunity to grab money as well. So didn't know. Just go back to Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Chair, can I take it then, in terms of a preliminary view from the committee, that the budget proposal in relation to 20 million to keep this scheme in its present form next year is something that generally finds favour with this committee, yes, and that the wider issue of what happens post-April 2016, maybe the committee could consider that and feedback views. We are particularly keen to answer the two questions. One is whether it is a priority and whether the committee feels it's affordable, and if so, what objective any such scheme should have, because that would help shape our, the options that we would develop later in the year, because we're going to have to do some further work on this.
Yeah, well, I think so, and as I said earlier on, especially in light of some of the emerging findings of the reval, I think it's important to continue the scheme for the year, and then to review it once again at that stage. And I think I get the impression from the report that most of the political parties, if not all, are in favour of that.
Yes, all
But,
five.
but I think that, you know, it can't be, the scheme was all things to all people before. I don't think it can, certainly if we were to take account of NICEP's views on this, in terms of economic impact, I don't think, you know, that whatever replaces it, if anything replaces it, but whatever replaces it, would have to be, would have to have a clear economic objective associated with it.
Okay.
I think that this one is predicated upon the background, the economic background.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, if that changes, it's a different scenario.
Yes, you're right. And I think as the Assembly want to be responsive to what changes in the wider world, and we want to be able to be responsive to it. And I think in terms of rating policy, we have tried to develop policies that do respond to the external conditions.
Right. Question is, you know, have the changes been significant enough to warrant the removal of the scheme? But
Well,
anyway,
I think back on last week, there was a report came out at the end of last week indicating growth factors, and in fact they were, for a period of time, they were writing us up as growing, but last week the report came out and stated that we actually had flattened.
If that's accurate,
gone back a bit.
the economy has been growing now since roughly 2010, but over the last quarter there certainly has been a range of data published that would suggest that the rate of growth is slowing.
right.
There are challenges ahead. We have austerity, we have consumer demand as indebtedness rises, that is beginning to slow off. So there are a number of factors out there that may mean that the economy will slow, and if that environment is the one that we face, then the committee will probably make different decisions in terms of the policies that we should implement.
Adrian?
Yeah, and also I think with the prospect with the corporation tax, we have the prospect of the economy growing as well. So I think, you know, it's important that we have this here for next year, and, you know, keep it on as a tool to use in the toolbox. But, you know, at the same time, if the economy does grow and their benefit, there's going to be really no call for this either. But I think we can't just throw it out now.
Great.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much, Richard and Brian. I know Brian is staying on for the next item on the agenda.
Nearly forgot.
I saw you packing up the books there. And,
Empty houses.
so we're moving now to item number 8, and we've set aside around 15 minutes for this. It's a developer rating exemption, and once again, Brian is the lead on this, head of policy, rating policy division at the Central Finance Group. So, Brian, are you happy to make an opening statement?
Well, the Minister's very keen to get the committee's views on whether the initial exemption granted to houses, older new houses, if that's not a contradiction in terms, should be removed, because we've extended a special enhanced initial exemption that was there to protect a certain generation of houses that were built or planned for during the boom years, and house builders, those that build speculatively, were faced with large stocks of unsold houses, and that was due to come to an end, but then it was enhanced, or it was extended twice, and we're asking the question, should we extend it further? If we are to do that, we're going to have to take regulations through this committee and through the Assembly to do so, and we're just questioning whether that is a sensible policy. Given, like we talked about context in relation to small business rate relief, well, context is equally important in relation to the continuation of this developers exclusion, because the housing market has improved significantly
Well, is it the intention
over the last year.
Is it the intention to remove the exemption just from the residual, what is it, 1,380
Yeah, it's just this
houses?
rump of properties that were built or planned for during the boom. Those that were entered in the valuation list before 2012, before the 31st of March
Sorry,
2012.
Paul, do you say that figure,
I-
1380 is?
That's, is there not more up-to-date data in relation to that figure, that there have been, a lot of those properties actually have been sold?
Well, a lot of those, that's the latest information we have on that, but
Yeah.
it is
1380.
it is dropping quite significantly month on month.
Right, okay.
And it does beg the question whether, it's worth giving an extra exemption to give them almost 5 years
I don't think so.
rate-free.
More in the market.
Okay.
I think.
Have you done any research on the impacts on developers of removing the exemption?
Well, in relation to the impact, it would be that they would fall liable to pay rates on any house that was completed but not sold. So that would be £1,000, £1,500 an average house, I would have thought, in
But
relation.
you're saying there is a pick up in the housing market,
Yes,
and that this figure is being reduced gradually.
Yeah, I mean, compared to the this quarter three last year, the number of house sales is up 21%, and that's significantly greater than the number of house sales that were taking place back in 2011 when we introduced this special exemption. So the housing market has picked up. It was seriously in the doldrums, and that's why ministers took the view that they didn't want to do anything that would impact adversely on house builders. But they've now had the benefit of an initial exemption that has been extended to 42 months.
Right.
And if we were to extend it more, it's getting into almost 5 years rates exemption.
Well, is it the case that all empty houses, or new houses, all empty new houses built after April 2012 have an exemption for 1 year?
Oh yes, and that will continue. There's no suggestion that the 1 year exemption that applies to all new houses will be removed. That will continue
That's gonna
regardless
continue,
of that.
right.
This was a special measure to deal with a certain generation of houses that were
Yeah.
built. They were either built during the boom or planned during the boom.
Okay.
And we didn't want that to be a shock to developers. And I think that was a very sensible policy at the time.
Okay.
But we're asking the question whether its time is over now.
Okay. Paul?
I just think that a number of developers actually were using the cover of this system to hold on, waiting on the house prices rising.
Yeah.
And once they seen a slight rise in the market, then they could offload them. I think unless we put, some impetus under it to make them an incentive to make them to make them drive forward and do something about it, they're not going to try and market it, because new houses are selling.
They are.
And I think we do need to actually maybe. I would be in favour of actually stepping back from that process for the next financial year, because I think the market has shown sufficient growth and movement to actually take up what is there, and as a consequence of that, I think there might be some developers who are taking advantage of having, while it's sitting there, it's eating no grass. But if it starts to cost them money, they'll definitely put a bit of marketing behind it and get rid of them, and that's what will happen.
Yeah. To go back to the 1 year post 2012, April 2012, how much potential revenue would be generated if that period of a year were to be reduced, say, to 6 months?
I'm just seeing if I can work it out for you. I don't have that information in front of me, but I can certainly
Yeah, it might be
get it
useful.
for you.
Might
I
be
mean,
useful.
by way of comparison, in relation to council tax in the rest of the UK, the exemption is 3 months. But we recognise the difficulties faced by the construction industry in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
But times are changing, and again, it's a change context issue.
Okay. Accept the point made by the department regarding the equality impact, but when can you provide the committee with the data on geographical spread of these type of homes?
Oh, I can do that for you. I'd certainly provide that for you. I'll have to get it from LPS. That's really, where are the 1,300 houses? Yeah,
Yes.
I can provide the committee with that. By probably existing district council area. If
It's
that's
not in Strabane because nobody wants to live there.
Mainly all.
Okay, thanks. That would be useful, okay. So, Adrian, you had
Yeah, I just
hand up.
sort of agree with what Paul was saying. I think this scheme has come to its end, and I think it's time we looked at it again. And I do think developers are hiding behind this here, but at the time of the boom, everybody was a developer, and there's wee individual houses around the country whoever was developing, maybe farmer or whatever, they're sitting there now with windows and a door on it and a roof on it, but they're nowhere near you could live in it, and they're being charged rates in that. And they're finding that they haven't the money to finish it. They're in a catch-22 situation. Is there anything we can do to help people like that, to try and encourage them to finish those houses to sell them on?
If they were put in the valuation list after 31st of March 2012, they get a 12-month exemption. But then there's a process called completion notice procedure. Now, it's not the same building. It's not the same as building control completion notice. That effectively gives them another 3 months, so they do get 15 months. To complete the property before rates are levied.
You just can't afford to do it. You can't afford to do it. I think that's where we're at. I'm thinking the two people I know had started to build houses back in the boom, and they got to this stage where they couldn't afford it. Then they got a wee bit more money. They put a roof on it and windows in it and a door on it just to close it up to leave it. Not plastered, not on. But then one of the guys took really sick and has been financial difficult since that. Can't sell the house as it stands. He has to try and pay rates on it, and it's these individual houses is not covered in this scheme.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not covered in the scheme. I mean, it's a property tax that levies rates based on properties. I suppose what that person should do is have a conversation with Land and Property Services in terms of their financial difficulty and see if they can get an easier repayment plan.
I think that's where he's at the moment,
set up. But in terms of trying to legislate for that, I think it would be extremely
No, I don't think they're
difficult
enough to legislate for it.
try and take account of the rare instances where that would occur.
Okay, Leslie.
You just go back, Chair, Cindy Alban said now, to the economic background. It has now changed.
Yes.
Houses are selling. It was particularly interesting, the big jump there, July, August, which was peculiar. I think that would be a holiday period. But I think now they need that incentive really just to get on, put the other houses in the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think any builder, leaving aside some of the exceptions you mentioned there, but any builder can attractively price their property and get it sold, or get it in the very healthy rental market in Northern Ireland. And there are people in housing need who could. It helps the whole housing affordability issue as well in Northern Ireland. So.
See, those people are simply waiting on the price to come up more, and they can afford to do that.
Yeah.
So if they can afford to do that, then they can afford to pay the rates.
Now, I mean, there's one thing, I'll provide the committee as quickly as I can, hopefully in the next day or so, but we need to still write to those ratepayers to tell them, or those potential ratepayers to tell them that if we are to change the policy. So would it be possible if we did come back to the committee, you could give us a view before the recess?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
That'd be much appreciated, thank you.
Okay. Michaela.
Yeah, certainly I can concur with what you're saying in terms of the housing social need that we have here. And if we all look at our own areas where there's lots of these developments who are lying empty, maybe the bank owns most of them. I don't know. Do you have that information, what developers actually own?
Interestingly, if ownership is passed, they will be liable for rates. It's only the original owner, which is normally the developer or the builder, will be entitled to this.
Right.
So if ownership is passed to the bank will be liable.
Well, there's the need for change.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do know there's plenty in all of our areas that are lying dormant, and there's such a massive housing need in those particular areas, and the bank owns these properties, and they could very well serve for to go forward for to address the housing need. No, I just wanted to find that out.
Okay, thank you, Michaela. And thank you, Brian.
Okay, I will come back to the committee then for the financial impact of reducing the 1 year exemption to 6 months, and then give you the geographical spread of the 1,300 houses affected, and I'll do that by district council area, and I'll try and get that to you within the next day or so.
The committee will come to a view next week about the continuation or otherwise of the scheme.
That'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I have 3 hard copies of the NICEP report if the committee. I don't know how many. I notice a lot of you are reading off screens, but if anybody would like to take away a copy, I'll leave those 3.
Okay, thanks very
Thank you.
much. We have, yeah. So, if anyone's short of Christmas reading, it's provided there. We move on to item number 9 now, which is the 2015 January monitoring around the departmental position, and hopefully we'll have a briefing from departmental officials, Brigitte Worth, Financial Director, DFP, and Rita Miller, Financial Division, DFP. Good morning, ladies, and you're very welcome. Just one or other, if you want to start off with opening remarks.
Okay, thanks, Chair. As you can see from the paper we've provided, we've got a relatively straightforward January monitoring position with a small reduced requirement of 500,000 that's arisen due to changes in our assumptions around both income generation and pay costs. In addition, as we highlighted at October monitoring, we need some funds to cover the remaining pay liability, and our bid at October monitoring was unsuccessful, so we've identified funding for this from within the department, and we now need to request permission to reallocate the funding to the correct area. On the capital side, we're continuing to work with the Strategic Investment Board to deliver the capital investment projects from the 23 million we'd bid for successfully at June monitoring. There are some commercial sensitivities in this area, so I don't want to be too specific, but things are progressing well, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to spend the full allocation. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
You said that the department is currently pursuing a number of potential invest-to save capital opportunities along with the SIB, and that a final assessment of spending is likely in December, and that you may have a capital surrender. Can I ask you, what precisely are the invest-to-save opportunities, and what type of sums of money are involved?
We're looking to buy a number of properties, office accommodation properties, and that will enable us to work with wider public sector organisations to help them to exit leases and then to move into owned accommodation, which will have lower level of costs and deliver resource savings. There are 4 or 5 opportunities that we have ongoing. One of those has already completed. We have agreement subject to contract on the second, and a third one is well progressed. The other 2 we're also hoping to get firmed up, shall we say, although we probably won't get final agreement before the final deadline for January monitoring. There is a configuration of agreements that will allow us to spend exactly the amount that we have allocated, but obviously that's going to be dependent on their commercial transactions, so it depends on somebody wanting to sell us something to us at a price that we believe is value for money.
Okay. So you're going from leasing to renting to owning?
Yes.
Right, okay. And regarding the potential capital surrender, can you give us any indication of the details around that?
As I say, at the moment there is a combination of circumstances that would lead to us having no capital surrender, and things are looking very promising in that respect at the moment. So I would be hopeful that the amount will actually be 0.
Right. Okay. And can I just ask you, the leasing to owning invest to save, is that confined to DFP, or are other departments involved in it as well?
DFP as the
lead.
the landlord, I suppose. We
All
would
right,
we own most of the office estate, and in fact, at the moment, under the executive's asset management strategy, we're pursuing a programme where actually all the office estate that doesn't belong to DFP would be transferred into DFP to enable us to manage it holistically. So some of the savings will accrue to arm's length bodies, but it's DFP that incurs the expenditure.
Okay, thanks. Regarding the online genealogical service, Jenny, what steps have been taken to ensure that the potential income from that type of revenue source is maximised?
Well, that project was launched this year, and it's the first year that it's been operating. So we have been pleasantly surprised by the level of demand. Actually, the demand, and that's the reason we have the money to hand back, the demand has been in excess of what we had expected. As part of our plans for 15-16, we are looking at all our income streams and ways that we could maximise those, and this will be included within that.
Yeah, and you said that there has been an unexpected demand for it. Is the service coping, and can it cope adequately with that?
Yes, it can. Yes, it's an online transaction service, so yes, it's well able to cope. We had profiled that demand would gradually rise. What we've seen actually is demand has come in high and has remained high. Yeah. Now, whether that will stay, this is the first year of operation, whether that will continue into year 2, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. And I noticed from your paper that you said that the department has taken steps to manage the 0.7 million Abdullah equal pay pressure internally, and has therefore submitted a proposal to reallocate the funds accordingly. Where has this money been reallocated from, and how has that been possible?
Well, as part of when we were looking at our reductions for the current financial year, across the department, we had at one point anticipated that there was a possibility that the 4.4% that was being asked of us might rise. And so at that time, we had put a number of measures in place across the department to reduce spending. And once it became apparent that that the 4.4% would be the limit, we looked again and said, well, rather than giving authorisation for people to continue to spend this 0.7, that we would set it aside for this. So it's come out of that exercise.
Okay, what about the implications for claimants of the delay in reallocating?
Well, we are continuing. We had set aside, I think, some 1.2 million last year, and so far that's roughly what we've paid out. I don't think that the lack of reallocation has caused us any delays in making payments.
Okay, thank you. Leslie?
Yeah, 2 points, Chair. The first one of my favourites. I always love to see where the money passes through the centre. I'm glad to see it's still alive and well. But the report says we received a further 1.3 million in financial transactions capital. What comes as news to you? It's the second page of the letter from the...
That's the autumn statement, Leslie, isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
29.
We don't have our numbers.
Sorry.
The letter dated the 4th of December from the Minister.
Page 229.
229 in our book.
Leslie, I think that's probably beyond the remit of officials who are here today. It's a different section.
Is that part of the autumn statement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that would be our colleagues in PSD. Then that's probably come to the centre rather than to DFP, the department.
Comes to the centre.
Sorry.
That's my point, right? So we had 30-odd million there, unallocated. So it's now increased. January, what's the situation about financial transactions capital?
I mean, again, I can't comment on that because I'm not involved in the position for the whole of the block, so I could only comment on DFP's own budget position.
Well, what's it then?
We have no financial transactions capital allocated to us at this stage, and we're not looking for any at this time.
Okay.
So.
Okay, well, I'll raise that in our place. The other point is, I'd appreciate you clarifying the issue with respect to the Barnett consequentials. Obviously, when allocations are made, it depends when they're made, doesn't it? If they're made, for example, in the June period, does that mean that this executive would actually get the money during the in-year?
Again, it's not my area. It really is for colleagues in Public Spending Directorate to comment on that. I'm not quite sure on exactly what the timing issues are around when those consequentials become available.
Because obviously that's a big thing. Again, this letter from the Minister refers, Chair, as you know, to us getting a further packet of money next year from, from that, because of the effect on health, for example. Kind of maybe, well, you probably can't answer this one either then, but I'd like to make sure that all of the consequentials that we're entitled to are actually on the record for in-year final monitoring.
Okay.
We've got all the money we're owed in old-fashioned language.
I have absolutely no doubt that colleagues in PSD will make sure we're getting every penny that we're owed. But I'm sorry, it's just not my area. I can't comment.
Is that above or below your pay grade then?
It's above my pay grade, definitely.
Okay. Any other questions?
Chair, just
Adrian,
there's
yes.
nothing in there for the equal pay issue on the civil servants who moved across to the police,
No, and I mean, again, that's not a matter for DFP. If and when that issue is resolved, it will be for DOJ to set aside or to
I thought it was the
funding.
DFP minister that put a paper to the
It is the DFP, that's true, but in terms of the actual budget consequences, I think the payments and the allocation would need to come through DOJ.
Okay.
Okay. No further questions. Bridget and Preeta, thank you very much. And no doubt we will meet again.
I'm sure we will.
I think I started a song that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And members, we'll move on to the next item, which I think is correspondence.
Yes, Chair.
And ask the clerk to comment on that.
Just run through items, Chair, requiring decisions. If members have any other issues, they can be raised. The page 236 of the pack is DFP's writing in relation to the rating of commercial window displays. So there's a policy document there, but if the members wish to have an oral briefing scheduled on that for early after recess, we could put that in the work programme, Chair.
That's the one you're talking about.
And this was another economic improvement, wasn't it?
It's the commercial window display.
Now we're going to tax it?
Yeah.
Has there been a big uptake on that, do you know?
Don't know. There's a paper there.
I haven't seen much
236,
change
but
in it.
it would be Brian McClure's area as well, rating policy. But we could schedule a session on that, Chair, if there's a wish to have that in the programme. Okay. Then there's at page 241. There's a post-project evaluation report from DFP in respect of lessons learned from projects across all departments. So that's first normally shared with PAC and the other statutory committees for a follow-up if members are contentious for that to be forwarded on. There's a paper from DFP on the page 236 of the pack, consultation and proposed changes to defined benefit contribution arrangements. The committee has been looking at this already, but in terms of the consultation, the committee could get a briefing, or it could add it in provisionally into the work programme for a briefing, Chair, for early in the new year.
Okay.
Then at page 293, there's a follow-up research paper on preventative spending, which the committee had commissioned. Again, it's an issue that comes up in the committee's budget considerations, so it's really as before, for forwarding on to the department for review if members are content.
Great.
And then finally, there's
Can I ask on that preventative spend? Was there an issue about preventative spend being seen as allowed under redundancy payments? Is that correct?
It is considered a form of preventative spending, and that gets to the issue of the definition of preventative spending, isn't it?
Interesting to note, and it's something that probably we should be looking at. I thought there was a cap upon recruitment And yet we're making people redundant in one department, but we're also recruiting in the same department.
Yeah.
Does that work out?
Something you want looked into, Paul?
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, and it's not within DFP.
Right, okay.
It's within DRD.
I think probably be told it's different grades or something.
Within?
DRD.
Chair, there's, that paper includes a look at some of the Invest to Save schemes in terms of some of them were redundancy, voluntary redundancy schemes, and
Yeah.
at that time. So then,
Okay.
so Chair, there's also a consultation paper
Yes.
that's been issued at page 299 on the defamation
Yes.
law. So it's again to receive a briefing on that once at an appropriate point in the work programme.
Thank you, that would be good.
And finally, then, there's a paper in from the First Division Association, the trade union for senior civil servants, in response to the issue of the forthcoming legislative consent motion to prevent officials who are earning over 100,000 from re-entering the civil service, public service. So there's some concerns, I think, around that. So it's really just to, if the members can content to send it to the department for review,
Yeah.
because the committee has to do a report, agree a report
Okay.
next week on that issue.
Grand, yes.
You're not involved in that, Shane, no?
Unfortunately not. A long way from.
Item 11 then is the committee work programme, and it's at pages 306 to 8 of the pack. Any comments on that, Shane?
Just, Chair, we'll have an update work programme or a provisional work programme for after the recess for next week's consideration, Chair. So,
Okay.
so next week's meeting, the additional meeting on the 17th, is just to agree the budget report and two short reports on legislative consent motions, all of which, by the way, will be debated first week back after recess.
Okay. Members, any other business?
Just can I raise an apology for?
Yeah, for
Next week.
Oh yes, well, thank you. So the date, time and place of the next meeting, 17th, Wednesday, 10 AM, room 30, Parliament Buildings. I put the question that the committee does now adjourn. Committee is now adjourned.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee.